So this morning I'm reading the news. Oh, by the way, I need to every now and then remind everybody what this YouTube channel is all about. It's about the true gospel, the salvation of Israel. And the true gospel is grace to Israel, to the 12 tribes of Israel, and to any Gentile who would like to take part in that grace. But they have to recognize that this grace was promised to Israel even in the days of Moses, when Moses told the Israelites that after they received the blessings and cursings, because he warned them that they would turn away from Jehovah, our Father in heaven, whose name is holy, they would turn away from him and they would turn to idolatry. And then he would drive them away. He would send the sword after them. And then while they were living in lands afar off, they would remember and want to go back home. And he would then bring them and have mercy, have grace upon them. That is the gospel. And it is the new covenant promised in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34. It is the new covenant that Paul repeated to the Hebrews in Hebrews 8, verse 8 through 12. And from the time of Constantine until now, the Gentiles have been persecuting, raping, pillaging, and murdering the Jews, forcing them to wear the yellow star and the yellow clothing of shame. But when the day of grace upon Israel is come, tribulation and anguish are going to fall upon Israel's enemies. Now, I needed to say that also in context of what I'm going to read next. This from the Times of Israel. UN chief proposes military force to protect Palestinians from Israel. You don't believe that that's a headline? Go look it up. It was posted yesterday on the Times of Israel. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Friday presented 4 options aimed at boosting the protection of Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, from sending UN rights monitors and unarmed observers to deploying a military or police force under UN mandate. The proposals were contained in a report requested by the General Assembly in response to a surge of violence in Gaza, where 171 Palestinians have been killed during Hamas-led clashes with Israeli troops since late March. Dozens of the dead were members of Hamas and other terror groups, Hamas has acknowledged. The UN chief stressed that for each of the options, cooperation by Israel and the Palestinians would be necessary. It remained unlikely, however, that Israel would agree to the proposals. In the 14-page report, Guterres proposed providing a more robust UN presence on the ground with rights monitors and political advisors to report on the situation, pouring in more UN humanitarian and development aid to ensure the well-being of the population, creating a civilian observer mission that would be present in sensitive areas such as checkpoints and near Israeli settlements, with a mandate to report on protection issues, deploying an armed military or police force under a UN mandate to provide physical protection to, listen carefully, Palestinian civilians. Let me remind everyone, it was the Palestinian civilians flying incendiary kites into Israel, burning thousands of acres of farmland. But the UN wants to protect the perpetrators. A UN mandate for protection force would require a decision from the Security Council, where the United States could use its veto power to block a measure opposed by Israel. A small European staffed observer mission was deployed in the West Bank city of Hebron in 1994, but Israel has since rejected calls for an international presence in the flashpoint areas. In the report, Gutierrez said the United Nations was already undertaking many protection initiatives, but that these measures fall short of the concerns raised in the General Assembly resolution adopted in June. In that measure, the 193 Nation Assembly condemned Israel for the deaths in Gaza and tasked Gutierrez with the drafting of proposals for an international protection mechanism for, once again, not for Israel, but for the Palestinians. Dozens of those killed have been acknowledged as members of Hamas and other Gaza-based terror groups. But of course, you see, folks, they want to protect Hamas and the other terror groups. This 193 Nation Assembly. Israel maintains soldiers have opened fire in accordance to Army regulation and accused Hamas, the terror group that runs Gaza, and is sworn to the Jewish state's destruction of using the clashes as cover to attempt to breach the border fence and carry out attacks. Gutierrez argued that a political solution to the conflict was needed to address the safety of the Palestinians, once again, the safety of the Arabs, but not the Jews, not the Israelis. But that until such solution is achieved, member states may further explore all practical and feasible measures that would significantly improve the protection of the, once again, Palestinian civilian population, not the Jewish Israeli civilian population. And then they say, oh, yes, such measures would also improve the security of Israeli civilians. Now, of course, when you read this, you realize they finally caught themselves being biased against the Israeli civilian populations and had to quickly add that particular sentence, you see. On Friday, the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza said 2 Palestinians taking part in clashes along the Gaza border were killed and another 270 were wounded. The Israeli Defense Forces said thousands of Palestinians took part in the riots, hurling improvised bombs and Molotov cocktails at troops. Others launched balloons carrying pictures of so-called martyrs who had been killed by Israel. Several attempted to infiltrate the border. Hamas leadership has urged the public to participate in Friday's events. Israel has defended its use of live ammunition in Gaza by invoking its right to self-defense. An Israeli soldier was shot dead by a Palestinian sniper in July. The targeting of civilians, particularly children, is unacceptable, Gutierrez said in the report, adding that those responsible for violations of international humanitarian law must be held accountable. The UN efforts to ensure the well-being of Palestinians must be strengthened, he added, singling out the funding crisis at the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, UNRWA, as being of particular concern. UNRWA is facing a major budget shortfall after U.S. President Donald Trump's administration decided to withhold its contribution to the agency, with the president linking the decision to the Palestinians' refusal to speak with his administration after he recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and because they were no longer willing to talk peace. Jared Kushner, Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, has been pushing to remove the refugee status of millions of Palestinians as a part of an apparent effort to shutter UNRWA, according to emails published earlier this month by Foreign Policy magazine. Israel has often criticized UNRWA, accusing it of sheltering terrorists and allowing Palestinians to remain refugees even after settling in a new city or a new country for many generations, thus complicating a possible resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The report released to all UN member states comes amid a vacuum in the Middle East peace efforts as Europeans and other big powers await a peace plan from the Trump administration that has been under discussion for months. UN diplomats have recently begun questioning whether the U.S. peace plan will ever materialize. The United Nations has warned that a new war could explode in Gaza as Israel and Hamas have engaged in a number of brief exchanges of fire in recent months and has included the launching of hundreds of rockets and mortars toward Israeli territory by Palestinian terror groups. Israel and Hamas have fought 3 wars since 2008. Now, folks, you can see the obvious bias by the UN chief, Guterres. You can see that the Palestinians, the fake Stinians, have been playing this game with the UN. If they can get as many of their children and terrorists getting shot, by having their children go and launch these incendiary balloons and doing all kinds of foolish things, tempt Israel into shooting them, then they can get the UN to side with them and their war against Israel, you see. And of course the UN, particularly the European nations and Russia, would do just about anything, would find any possible way, would look for any possible way they could find in order to side with the Palestinians. And in doing, and in these statements made by the UN chief proves that. It's like a reward for the fake Palestinians for their actions. And so the cycle continues. Now, as I have been saying for a good while, the United States needs to force the United Nations out of the United States. The United Nations headquarters is in New York City. And the United States, by hosting the United Nations, when the United Nations have been pushing to renege on the mandate, the Palestine mandate, not once, not twice, but 3, 4, 5, or 6 times, they are, by allowing this criminal organization, the United Nations, to be based in New York, is inviting the wrath of Jehovah on the United States of America. Now, something that I do want to point out, as you know, it's been a while since California has had a major earthquake. Well, something has happened. What was it, last night? I believe it was. Near Fiji, there was a very, very deep earthquake. An 8.2 at 594 kilometers deep. Some of the deepest that that the world has ever seen. Now, of course, the government or the people who monitor the government people who monitor these earthquakes are saying, "Don't worry about it. There's no tsunamis. Nobody's going to be affected by it because it's so deep." Well, here's the problem. That's going to trigger more extremely heavy surface earthquakes. And I think everyone should really start paying attention for the next 7 to 10 days. There are reports that this particular earthquake may have caused the Apopo volcano to start erupting again. But what we've been having lately is earthquakes bouncing around the plates around the Ring of Fire. We saw earthquake of 6.5 in Costa Rica, and it's caused a lot of problems over there. And we saw, and this is before, these earthquakes are before this big one, this big 8.2. We saw some 6.5s or close to 6.5 in Indonesia, and bouncing smaller earthquakes around California, and also a larger one of 6.4 or 6.5 in Alaska. So this magnitude 8.2 has the potential to cause very, very, very serious problems, because the one that triggered the Costa Rica quake and the Alaska quake was only around 6.5, I think. This one is an 8.2, way deep. So, and it was what? A day? 24 hours after this statement from the UN chief Gutierrez. Now, I'm not saying that an earthquake is going to, or something really bad is going to happen in the United States as a result of what the UN chief says. What I am saying is the U.S., the United States of America, by hosting this evil called the UN in New York City, is inviting it. That's what I'm saying. So, what I'm going to do now, there's a website on Twitch. It's called Dutch Sense. Let's see if I can find it. And I'm going to post a link. And especially you folks in the West Coast, and of course I know that there's nobody in the West Coast listening to what I have to say. But, like I said, I'm going to post a link of this website and listen to this guy. I don't agree with everything that he says, but listen to him, because he seems to have a knack of following patterns of earthquakes and warning people in particular areas that one might happen there, and then it does happen. He has a real good layout of his earthquake monitor, and when he explains it, it's very easy for even the simple minds to understand how he comes up with his earthquake forecasts. So, because of what just happened last night, I think anyone who it would behoove everyone to find out what is going on with this earthquake situation. Once again, I'm not saying that an earthquake is going to happen to the United States because of hosting the UN. Okay, I'm not one of these people who are trying to prophesy and predict that damnation is going to happen to the United States. They're always saying it's going to happen to the United States, and they have not read the scripture where it talks about the wrath being on Rome, that great city, and upon the northern nations that come and attack Israel, any nation that comes and attack Israel. I always stick with scripture, but what I'm saying is that once again, the United States of America, by hosting the United Nations in New York City, this foul and evil romantic organization of nations in the United States that constantly spews out bias and hatred against Israel, the United States is inviting the wrath of Jehovah upon our land. And this organization should be kicked out. But once again, nobody listens to me, so I guess the invitation is still exists. So once again, pay attention. I don't think the earthquakes are going to go silent after this 8.2 way deep in the ground.